This is a 1986 Yugo GV. It is almost universally known for being not only an absolute turd, but for being one of the worst cars of all time. Well, today, I'm going to prove to you, no, I'm going to have the car prove to you why all of that is complete nonsense. And this is actually a very good car. I have no idea how fast that was spinning. There's no tachometer because that would be a feature, and that would raise the cost of the car. If I was a hard-hitting automotive journalist sinking my shark teeth into a fresh automotive victim, then I think I would probably start with the interior. So my quest to have the Yugo prove itself worthy shall start with the interior, specifically the things you interact with the most in here. Let's start with the steering wheel. Okay, it feels super cheap, almost like a 1950s Bakelite or something, but it can be forgiven for using cheap materials. It's a cheap car. It uses cheap materials to keep the cost down. Yeah, it's good. For items like the dash, it's fine to use cheap, horrible to touch plastics because you don't drive down the road caressing your soft dash, so why spend more money on materials for areas like that? As long as the materials they use don't warp, crack, break in any way, like they haven't, then yeah, go ahead, use cheap materials. Where you should use more expensive, nicer to touch materials is in places that you often touch, like these switches. Okay, the switches actually sort of somehow feel worse than the dash, but that's probably not the norm. Okay, so the switches aren't good, but what else is there? There's, the climate controls. You'll touch them often, and they actually feel terrible as well. They feel like they're set in something akin to like freshly chewed gum, maybe, and actuating them forces you to touch the horrible dash pieces, the plastic dash pieces around them, so that's not good. But look how simple and easy they are to use. You've just got 3 knobs here. Well, actually, I say simple, but the fan speed controls are inexplicably over here in the switch panel on the complete opposite side of the car, so your passenger can't control your fan speed, but they can control your temperature. Maybe the climate controls aren't exactly the best example of putting money where it matters. How about these column stocks here? Oh, the column stocks. They're actually quite fantastic to use. They have a nice affirmative action, and they don't feel like they're going to snap off on your hand. Plus, they only move up and down. None of this forward and back nonsense. The bright dim selector is a separate stock altogether. I mean, yeah, they do look a little bit past it. They're quite chalky looking, and for some reason the bright dim selector is much larger than the blinker stock, so you accidentally hit that all the time. But otherwise, well done, Yugo. Another example of money where it matters is the door. First of all, just listen to it. Sounds solid, aside from that horrible rattle, whatever that was. And the niceness doesn't stop with the solid sound of the door. Look at the door panel. It's covered in this nice, soft, whatever this is, the door handle is covered in this nice, soft touch rubber material, and it's all very not horrible to put your arm on. And you may be wondering what this little hole is for. Well, that's where the door handle normally goes, but unfortunately on Yugos it seems to be made of some sort of plastic twig, so it's broken off on this one like they tend to do. Also, the door doesn't have any detents on it, so it's either closed or trying to close, which is kind of unfortunate, but overall the door is a quality package. Also, look at these little rotary locks. They're so neat. Okay, so maybe the cost cutting is widespread and they didn't focus the money into the things you interact with the most. But all is not lost. The Yugo is still a very cheap car, and there's more to a car than interior trim pieces. I mean, they don't really matter anyway, do they? So maybe the Yugo can still redeem itself and prove itself a worthy commuter car. The Yugo has tons of storage space to meet your practicality needs. For example, it is a hatchback, so you can just open the hatch and bear witness to your vast cargo capacity. I mean, look at this. It even has, sort of, a parcel shelf to cover your belongings. Yeah, let's just assume that doesn't exist there. And if you need more space, just fold down your rear seats to give you plenty of extra storage volume. Look at that. And vastly increase your storage space. I mean, no, they don't fold flat, but flat folding seats would require engineering, and that would cost you money. Yes, if I had to complain, I could find some things to complain about. For instance, this load lip, it is rather high, so you'll strain yourself lifting stuff over it to put in the back. And yes, when the hatch is closed, it looks like it just sort of overlaps the bodywork instead of fitting flush with it. It makes it look a bit like an afterthought. And the bottom of the hatch has drain holes in it, which is fantastic. Drain holes are required to let the water run out of the bodywork so it doesn't pool there and cause rust. Unfortunately, the drain holes on this hatch are actually just above the absolute bottom of the hatch, so water still pulls in there and causes rust, like is very evident on this one. But all these things are forgivable, right? Yeah, the Yugo can still prove itself. Back in the front of the car, you'll find that the Yugo has tons of loose storage to meet your daily driving needs. Notice there I said loose storage. That's because this car has basically nothing in the way of organized storage. It doesn't have a glove box, it doesn't have a center console, it doesn't have cup holders, it doesn't even have door pockets, which I find extraordinarily amazing. In fact, the only thing it does have in the way of organized storage is this little cubby hole where a glove box should be, and this other little cubby hole right in front of the gear stick. Oh, also it has 3 ashtrays around the cabin, if that's what you're into, and this little smoker window. The people storage in the Yugo is also pretty good. The front seats are actually pretty comfortable compared to the seats in my Yugo, for instance. They're vastly superior to the seats in my Yugo, and they're made from much longer lasting cloth rather than vinyl that shreds in a matter of years. The rear seats on the Yugo are easy enough to get into. But they do leave a little bit to be desired in the way of head and leg room. No matter, just stop having friends and you'll get along with your Yugo just fine. If you're wondering what sort of features a Yugo like this has, well, I'm going to save you the time by telling you it doesn't have most everything. In fact, the fanciest feature I can think of on this one is probably the radio. Remember, GV stands for great value. That's enough about silly features and storage space and practicality. Let's talk about motivation. Maybe the Yugo can prove its worth with its motivational abilities packed right in here under the hood. Let's go ahead and get this out of the way. This hood scoop here, it's for cabin ventilation, nothing else. The engine in this car is a 1.1 liter 4-cylinder with probably the most adorable radiator I think I've ever seen. The engine is carbureted, which isn't great for 86. In Europe, it made 55 adequate horsepowers. Unfortunately, in America, to meet emissions regulations, that was reduced to only 50, which is worse, but I'm sure it'll still be plenty adequate to meet with normal traffic demands. Unfortunately, despite having reduced power to meet emission standards, it still didn't do the trick, and all of these engines had to be recalled. Just ignore that little point. The transmission in this car is a 4-speed manual. Sure, it could use an extra gear, but cheap car, so on and so forth. You get the idea by now. The next step in my mission to prove the Yugo good is to drive the car. And I'm sure the experience I'm about to have will single-handedly prove that the Yugo is indeed an adequate and non-awful car, unlike what it's been made out to be over the years by pretty much everyone. Okay, we haven't set off yet, but there are 2 problems that I'm noticing right away. One is the pedal box is, you know, just a little bit cramped. So I'm going to have to, in order to drive this car properly and feather the accelerator and everything, take off my right shoe. I'll put it up here on the dash. Really, that's my own fault for having such massive feet. But the second problem is the gear shifter. I mean, look at this thing. It's in first gear right now, and this is the amount of play it has in it. It's ridiculous. But never mind. I'm sure the rest of the car is fine. So let's start. Clutch is super squeaky. My shoe is fogging up the window. Let's go ahead and start it. Yeah, sounds like a smooth engine. I don't know what people are complaining about. I bet this is actually going to be a fairly adequate car, like a Golf or something. All right. I think that's first gear. Let's go. Take the handbrake off, obviously. Okay, that didn't launch very well. Let's try launching in first gear again. Surely that was a fluke. Good golly, Miss Molly. All right, let's rev it up. Wherever the snot out of it this time. It still died. What do you have to do? Okay, but I'm sure it's probably just this car. It couldn't have come out of the factory that way. Surely it's powerful enough to get out of its own way. let's back up, and so I'm not trying to go up a hill. Obviously, that'll help. Same with the gear lever. I'm sure it's just this one. They probably didn't come out of the factory that way. Let's try it again. Rev the There we go. I'm moving under its own power. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to stop very soon. It only took 5 attempts to get going. Really, I think that's perfectly acceptable. Make sure it's in first. All right. Oh, dogging hesitation. All right, shifting to second, which is straight down. Oh yeah, brilliant. Listen to that. It's almost singing. The gear shifter may be loose, but I can find gears. There's a roundabout coming up. Oh, it pulled to the right quite a bit under brake. I'm sure that was just this car. They didn't all pull to the right under braking from the factory. All right, pick it up, accelerator. Come on, you can do this. Oh, now it's singing. That little Fiat engine. Shifting to third. A little crunch there. Oh yeah, this is good. The lights need to be on. Oh yeah, the speed limit's 55 here. Let's shift down into fourth. Right, the speedometer doesn't work, but I'm sure it's just this car. They didn't come out of the factory that way. They came out of the factory with working speedometers. Let's try doing a little rev match downshift, shall we? That wasn't very precise. The pedals feel terrible. They're really awkwardly placed. So at slow speeds, it does actually feel quite horrifically slow, like Trabant levels of slow, but at faster speeds, well, it still feels slow, but it feels more adequate than it does at, say, 10 miles an hour, because at higher speeds, you don't have to launch yourself using the impossible-to-judge clutch. So that's nice. I am starting to get the feel for this car now, actually. After a while, you start to realize that the clutch, it's just going to fight you the whole time, so you have to fight it. And once I learned that, it's actually not that bad. There's still quite a bit of hesitation in the carburetor, and the brakes, they're alarming, but I'm sure it's just this car. Not all Yugos were like that. All right, so as it turns out, the Yugo is actually barely adequate as a car. The pedals feel horrible. The gear change is equivalent to, say, rowing a boat, and the engine is so weak that, well, I can barely start in first gear, and speed limits sort of become goals. But you know what? It's probably just this Yugo that's a writhing pile of trash. I bet other Yugos from the factory and the rest of the Yugo population is just fine. I'm sure they're perfectly adequate commuter cars normally. It's just this one that's a pile of trash. Yeah. I'm going to go with that assumption. And plus, when they were new, they were extremely cheap, and they came with free maintenance and a 10-year warranty. How could you possibly go wrong? What's up, guys? It's Austin here. In today's video, I'm going to hopelessly ramble about nothing while a Yugo precariously sits in the background.